Welcome in, everybody. Welcome to my final deep dive in this off-season season preview series here now 2 days after the season has started. Ravens fans, thank you so much for your patience. And just to all of you guys, this has been a wild 450 days or so. As many of you guys know, my wife and I moved to Charlotte last June. That was following a 3-week Euro trip that we took following the NFL draft that year. So we have since moved back to Minnesota. We've had 3 moves, a 3-week Euro trip, 2 off seasons, 1 NFL draft cycle. It has been a wild stretch here. And unfortunately, it did impact my scheduling for the deep dive series here, and last year for that matter. But I promise you, the goal is certainly not to be posting this final deep dive as late as this one is coming out here. But I do want to thank all of you guys who have reached out, checking in on me, making sure I'm getting enough sleep. It's definitely been a grind to get this series done, so looking forward to turning the page to the start of this NFL season, and just the biggest of thanks to all of you for watching, whether this is your first deep dive or you binged all 32. Your support for this series has just been incredible. Numbers were up this year. You continue to give me great feedback on some of the tweaks and adjustments I can make to make this series even better for you guys. And sorry for the long intro here, but while we're here to talk some Ravens, this is also a celebration of another fantastic deep dive series, and I have you guys to thank as well. But Ravens fans, let's go ahead and get started with this Baltimore Ravens deep dive. The expectations are quite clear with Baltimore. Win the Super Bowl this year or bust. They've been knocking at the door for years, and honestly, there's not even that many questions about this football team. It's just, can they get to January with a good plan, get to January healthy, and get the damn thing done this year? But we will talk today about where some of the smaller questions might lie with this team, and dive into some of their bigger strengths that do make them such a prominent Super Bowl contender this season. So, as always, let's begin by discussing the coaching staff, and we begin each chapter of this deep dive by taking a look at their offseason changes and asking whether they got better, worse, or stayed the same, whether it is with the coaching staff or with each position group as we go here. But with the coaching staff staying neutral from this offseason, Todd Monken, their offensive coordinator, did get some head coach interviews, but didn't land them. He is going to stay put here. So ultimately, the same staff back for Baltimore. A good starting point, as this is an excellent Baltimore Ravens coaching staff. But I do want to kick this off by begging the question to Ravens fans: is John Harbaugh on the hot seat, or should he be? Perhaps 2 different questions there in terms of, would the Ravens actually move on from John Harbaugh if they don't win the Super Bowl this year? But this has kind of bled into the Sean McDermott conversation with the Buffalo Bills, where it's like, okay, and even more so here with John Harbaugh, there is no doubt he is a good, if not great, NFL head coach. But have the Ravens become a little bit maxed out with him at the helm? There's no doubt that he builds and sustains an excellent culture here in Baltimore, but is it fair to question if another coach couldn't also sustain the great culture that Harbaugh has helped build and establish here, while also maybe bringing schematic genius and a true X's and O's advantage, whether it be on the offensive or defensive side of the ball? When every year you're trying to go up against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, Josh Allen and the Bills, Joe Burrow and the Bengals presumably will get back there eventually if they could ever draft correctly in Cincinnati. Every little edge you can get might be the difference against these types of opponents in big-time playoff games. And yes, John Harbaugh is an excellent head coach. If they were actually bold enough to move on from him, he would absolutely get hired immediately. But that would probably be to another coach that is looking to kind of raise up the floor of the team. I think the question with a CEO-style coach like Harbaugh, who has struggled to get over the hump in the AFC, maybe the ceiling has been reached here. I just want Ravens fans' opinion on that. I want to take the temperature from Ravens fans on Harbaugh here. I obviously love John Harbaugh. I have them as the 11th ranked head coach. I feel uncomfortable even saying anything negative about him because he has done such a great job in Baltimore. But I do find that to be the most fascinating conversation with this coaching staff. The bar has been risen so high here in Baltimore that it is championship or bust for another year. And at some point, it might be time for a change. But obviously, from a culture perspective, the Ravens are in the best of hands with John Harbaugh. But when you do have a CEO-style coach, you are going to put more pressure on your coordinators to be great. So let's shift focus to the coordinators here. We'll start on the offensive side of things with Todd Monken. Like I mentioned, was getting head coach interviews, which is yet another downside to having kind of a CEO style head coach, is that even if you do nail your coordinators, you're setting yourself up just to make things harder on yourself if you have to replace those coordinators if they get head coaching jobs. But at least for now, Monken is back, and Harbaugh found a good one here, making that kind of tough decision, I'm sure, for him to move on from Greg Roman, who seems to be kind of the grand uncle of the Harbaugh coaching tree. I can't imagine it was easy to part ways with him. But yeah, Monken's been a brilliant hire, comes right in, gets Lamar that MVP season. And frankly, last year, things were operating even more smoothly. This has really evolved into, I think, the vision that you could have dreamed of for Lamar earlier in his career, where, yes, you still find ways to lean into Lamar Jackson as that designed rushing threat. You still will run a lot of play action and run with those heavy personnel packages that were such a signature part of Greg Roman's offense. The Ravens ran the sixth most 12 personnel with 2 tight ends out there. They ran the third most 21 personnel with the use of that fullback in addition to a tight end. So under Monken, they haven't really lost a lot of that identity that did work under Greg Roman and the early Lamar Jackson days. But I think Monken has brought such a more balanced offensive scheme to the table. You see, number one, a lot more of the kind of like Shanahan style play action boots and implementing a lot of that style of Shanahan McVay system that we see so much around the league. You see that in this offense, and then you see a much more balanced kind of shotgun drop back passing game as well, as opposed to what we saw with Greg Roman. Though, hey, I am recording this after that Chargers-Chiefs game where Greg Roman had maybe the game of his career for the Chargers, but it certainly wasn't the case drawing things up in the passing game for these Ravens in the way that it has been here for Todd Monken. So it's hard to really put a name on like what type of scheme the Ravens really run. I think balanced is really the best way to call it there. You just see a lot of the different influences from some of the great offensive schemes throughout the league all brought together here in Baltimore, which is the best way to do it when you have a quarterback like Lamar that's the ultimate dual threat with obviously his legs, but how he's evolved as a drop back passer as well. So things are really humming with Todd Monken here. There's a reason he's getting head coaching interviews. He turned 60 this year, so I would think that, you know, he's trying to get that head coaching position before it's kind of too late there. So this might be the last year with Todd Monken here, which puts even more pressure on the Ravens, I think, to get it done this year. Because then, of course, you're right back to, man, we got to get this coordinator hire right again, and a new guy that can develop play calling chemistry with Lamar. But with that, the Ravens come in roughly top 10 for my offensive coaching rankings here. They come in 10th to 13th for pass game coaching and 8th to 11th for run game coaching. So in a very good spot there. I don't think if you asked a pretty diehard NFL fan who are the top 7 or 8 play callers in the league, I don't think too many of them would say Todd Monken. He's probably on that next cusp of guys, but certainly well above average and very good as the offensive coordinator here. And then you go to the defensive side of things with Zach Orr, now in his second season as the defensive coordinator here, but he has been around here now for over 10 years, starting as a player going back to 2014, but now his, 8th year as a football coach for the Ravens, and now 2nd year as the defensive coordinator, and he's going to continue to very much run that Mike Macdonald modern NFL meta style defense that really began here in Baltimore under Mike Macdonald and has now really permeated throughout the league to 5 or 6 other teams. And we can break down that scheme once again, as we have with the deep dives of all of those other teams that run this defense. But as far as Zach Orr himself is concerned and how good he has shown to be as a defensive coach, I think we're very much still learning just how good he is. He's very young, just 33 years old. He's got to be one of the youngest coordinators in the league, certainly one of the youngest ones actually like in control. There's some, I think, even younger that are maybe more like assistant offensive coordinators, with the head coach being play callers. But it's really impressive that Zach Orr is in the position that he's in. And I do think that youth showed early last season, right? Like, this Ravens defense was not humming out the gate. They did feel the challenges of losing a Mike Macdonald, especially in the first half of the season. In fact, friend of the channel, Brett Coleman, I think was out there in that midseason Bengals game, I think after Jamar Chase's fourth touchdown on them, when Brett called it the Legion of Room defense. This team definitely had their struggles on that side of the ball early, and there were some questions on just how good of a job Zach Orr was doing, kind of handling this very complex Mike Macdonald system. And those questions were fair, but boy, did Zach Orr answer them well. And there are plenty of reasons to be excited about where this is going now with him. And you can certainly forgive him for having a bit of a slower start, considering he was just 32 years old. But you love seeing a defensive coordinator that can make midseason adjustments and get the team on the right track. And in the case of the Ravens, it was really just kind of shuffling the deck with their secondary, pulling the plug on some veterans on the back end that were not getting the job done, releasing Eddie Jackson, benching Marcus Williams, and just like that, things seemed to get fixed, and this team was, by the end of the season, 6th in defensive DVOA as they headed into the playoffs, and that's considering their early season struggles. So they really were playing like one of the best defenses in the league down the stretch. So definitely kind of looking to build off of that now, kind of settled back in without that staff turnover here. And no reason to believe that Zach Orr won't continue to become one of the rising names as far as defensive coaches around the league and potential head coach candidates, frankly. As we know, the NFL is looking to replicate this system and find guys that can run this style defense for themselves. And who better than the guy that stepped in and ran this system after Mike Macdonald left? So I don't know that it's going to be this year necessarily. We might, depending how well things go, we might start to see him get some interviews, but might only be a matter of time before we're having even bigger conversations about Zach Orr running a whole football team. But even more reason to say, as long as these two guys are here, it is really setting things up staff-wise for this to quote-unquote be the Ravens' year. But we should spend a little bit more time talking about this defensive scheme, as we've done for all the other teams' deep dives around the league running this Mike Macdonald-inspired system. I realize not everybody watches all 32 of these 2-hour-long deep dives, but the way I've come to kind of describe this system in a nutshell is a more aggressive version of the Vic Fangio-inspired defenses that also have permeated throughout the league. At the core of it, you're talking about those two-shell cover structures on the back end, especially pre-snap, where you don't want to kind of tell the quarterback what coverage you're going to be in pre-snap, and then the idea that you could really rotate into any number of coverages after the snap, with one of those safeties potentially buzzing down. So it ends up being a pretty zone-heavy defense with their fair share of using those off-zone principles, a lot of match zones on the back end, but sort of that Fangio-inspired keep a blanket over the offense, prevent big plays, rally, tackle, and communicate from a coverage perspective. But this system, this Macdonald system, much different than a Fangio-style system that we just discussed, obviously with the Eagles deep dive, our last one, but much different in terms of some other aspects of the defense. Even in some of those off-zone principles, all of the coaches in this scheme seem to be a little bit more willing to reduce that off-zone space. Sometimes you'll see them running quarters at a 5-yard depth instead of maybe an 8-yard depth, just, a little bit tighter in terms of allowing quick outs and easy access to the flat and quick hitting passes, a little bit less passive than we've seen not just from Vic Fangio's defense, but from a lot of the Fangio disciples around the league, but also as far as how they craft their front. The Ravens and these teams are very creative with their multiple fronts and their different blitz looks that they will throw at you. I've discussed in these other deep dives how they like to teach every member of their front every different gap assignment so that you can really move these guys around and call different blitz looks that are actually the same play calls, which allows you to just stay very multiple and unpredictable. It allows you to keep things simple for your players so that they understand what's going on and they get to kind of have that understanding too, especially if you're running stunts and loops and stuff. It's like these guys really understand, okay, if I blow this guy up, that guy looping around for the edge or looping around from that 3 technique, I did that last week, and it was great when my teammate occupied these 2 guys, so I was able to come loop around. They're so good at understanding everybody's role within these different blitzes. But the other thing that kind of idea of just moving these guys all around does is it keeps things simple, and like I said, you get that added chemistry on your end, but for your opponent, you're throwing something at them that was not on film from the last few weeks. They will see you line up in a random look, and they're like, what is coming? So whether it's Zach Orr here or Mike McDonald in Seattle, you see highly efficient, confusing blitz looks to get after the quarterback, whether that is by just throwing numbers at the problem. The Ravens are not afraid to run zero blitzes. They ran the 7th most covered zero in the league last year. But it's also, creating phantom pressure even when you're not blitzing. Really, the Ravens and all of the teams in this system are kind of middle of the pack in terms of blitz rate. But if you show 6 guys mugged up at the line of scrimmage, but if you end up dropping a edge rusher into coverage or running different twists and games up front, it might not get charted as a blitz, but what you might do is create that phantom pressure where the O-line thinks the rush is coming from one side, they slide in that direction, and you end up with a numbers advantage sending guys from the other direction. So their blitz schemes are highly efficient, though, again, they don't blitz too much. Pretty middle of the pack in terms of blitz rate. But that is different than a Vic Fangio, who, as long as he's got the right players to do it, he wants to be someone that hardly ever blitzes, just as we saw from the Eagles last year. So it's been kind of that final evolution, it feels like, of the Vic Fangio system that has been the modern meta for a long time. There's a reason the league is looking at this iteration of a similar system and saying, actually, the guys coaching it that way, it's even better and more applicable to our defense. And the Ravens are at the heart of all of it with this system coming through the woodworks, obviously starting with Mike McDonald and now Zach Orr. So I do like Zach Orr. I think he's definitely trending up. I think we need to see more of Orr. Again, the first half of last year was pretty ugly, but we are heading in the right direction with him. But as far as their defensive coaching rankings, especially with pass defense coaching, they did spend half the season last year as one of the worst coached pass defenses in the league, and they can't completely get by with that until they can prove to be much more rock solid this season. It's not that their pass defense coach rankings are bad for me, but they do rank 22nd to 27th there. Whereas from a run defense perspective, I think we've seen a much more steady continuation of their excellent run defense in Baltimore. They come in as high as 10th for run defense coaching, but it's a very, very good overall coaching staff. I'm not going to sit here and say it's the best or even one of the best coaching staffs in the league, but I think the hope is that this is a good enough staff to not hold them back, to get over that final hump and win the Super Bowl, especially as this might be like the peak in terms of that idea that, okay, John Harbaugh is the CEO. It's going to be tough to find that perfect window of having 2 great coordinators on both sides of the ball under him at any given time. Well, they have that set up this year until one, if not both of these guys go and get hired elsewhere and cause some new questions in future seasons. So just puts a lot of pressure on the 2025 Ravens, as does this Ravens roster as we transition to the meat and bones of this discussion. We'll break down every position group, how they rank against the rest of the league, and we'll start at quarterback. As far as the offseason changes go, obviously no reason to make any big moves there, but they did bring in Cooper Rush, a capable backup there, but I said neutral at quarterback from this offseason. But yeah, Lamar Jackson, bona fide elite quarterback, really no questions left to raise about Lamar. You rewind 3-4 years ago, I would have had some questions about some of his processing, decision-making, some of the issues in the playoffs with him laying some stinkers in the playoffs coming up, some of his deep ball accuracy. I mean, like 2-3 years ago, I didn't think Lamar was at this level. But he has played at such a high level that it's essentially impossible to raise any questions about just how good he is today. Easily could have won another MVP this year. I think it was just kind of like voter fatigue where the voters felt like Josh Allen deserved it. Maybe they saw Lamar inflating his numbers against a bad Giants team in the second to last week of the season or whatever it was and brushed off some of those stats that did actually make Lamar's numbers look better than Josh Allen. I understood the vote either way, but either way you slice it, like Lamar definitely could have gone back-to-back MVPs. And as far as the whole like playoff narrative where historically Lamar has not played the best in January, I mean, that wasn't the issue this year. Dominant in the wild card round against a good Steelers defense. And I thought he played great against the Bills in that big divisional round game as well. You know, the kind of weird interception early was maybe a miscommunication, but even if it was an overthrow that led to an early pick, okay, it's a ding. But other than that, I mean, the way he battled back, put his team in an awesome position to win that game. It's just, I mean, Mark Andrews is the one that choked in that game, right? So there's no kind of cloud over Lamar, questioning if there's some kind of like mental hurdle when the games matter most. Like, no, we know this dude is clutch. We know he's going to be in a position to play well in January. It's just like, go finish the damn thing, Baltimore. But the way he's developed his accuracy over the years, the way he sees the game, the way he's taken on this Todd Monken offense, where, you know, coming out, you know, starting his whole career in that Greg Roman offense, I did at least raise questions of like, well, let's see how he handles a little bit more of a pro style offense where they're going to ask him to take a bigger command of the offense as a passer. I didn't doubt that he could do it. I just was interested to see it. And he has passed that test with flying colors. And then obviously what he does as a runner as well. Like you'll see not just an elite passing grade for me on Lamar, but he is the number one run game impact of any quarterback in the league. And he might even be a little underrated for him being kind of clear-cut the best rushing threat right now. Specifically as a designed runner. You might not think it, but Lamar Jackson had 621 designed rushing yards last year. That is taking out scrambles and stuff. The next one down was Jalen Hurts with 370. It's about half of what Lamar had. And Hurts had 30 more designed runs. Obviously, the QB sneaks and stuff get counted there, so there's a lot of those. But if you look at efficiency metrics, Lamar was second in yards per design, just a tick behind Kyler Murray, actually. But as we talked about in the Cardinals deep dive, the Cardinals don't lean into Kyler with the volume that the Ravens are able to lean into with Lamar. So it's not just the fact that he's evolved into an elite passer. It's that they've continued to tap into his ability as a designed runner as well. And I just got to say, before we move on, it has been so fun to see a guy with his physical traits paired what I think has fully emerged as good of pocket presence as any QB in the league. Right up there with Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and these guys that just are able to feel that rush, know where to step up, know how to buy time and extend plays with their legs. I mean, it's not just a physical thing, right? Extending plays inside and out of the pocket. Tom Brady had as good of pocket presence as any QB ever. But you now do that with an athlete like Lamar Jackson. Any third down is perfectly alive with Lamar Jackson. The drive is not dead until you get that football back. It has been sensational to watch this in this kind of prime of Lamar Jackson here in these MVP caliber years. So obviously a pretty damn good starting point when you've got this guy as your quarterback. And just as we mentioned with Josh Allen and even hinted at with Joe Burrow, the way Patrick Mahomes has played over the last 2 years, I'm still not ready to take that crown away from Patrick Mahomes as the game's best quarterback in the league. But if we see yet another season of this where Lamar outplays him, Josh Allen outplays him, I think Burrow outplayed him last year, I think the opportunity for any of these guys to come out of this season with me saying we have a new QB1 in the NFL is there. the opportunity is there to go out and take it. So maybe that can be Lamar this year, maybe even sealing it with a Lombardi at the end of this. Now they did go and sign Cooper Rush. I do think this is another kind of compliment to Lamar, that this offense has become much more of a NFL style offense. Feels like forever the Ravens backups have been Josh Johnson, Tyler Huntley, these really athletic kind of guys that if Lamar goes down, the idea is, all right, we're going to do designed runs and play action and kind of do the kind of gimmick Greg Roman thing. Not anymore. Like, they now have a quarterback. They obviously can't do the designed rush threat, but they now have a backup quarterback that, like, they don't have to change the passing game calls if Cooper Rush is going to step in. He is more of that typical kind of game managing backup that can at least distribute the ball with his arms. So definitely a different style of backup than they've gone with in the past, but I think he's shown in his time in Dallas, stepping in with some Dak Prescott injuries, that he's a very, very capable backup. And if Lamar is going to have to miss a couple weeks, you're not dead to rights with Cooper Rush. You just got to be a little bit more careful with the ball and with the defense, and have your playmakers step up a little bit more. But backup quarterback is always one of those things that doesn't seem to matter until it does. So I get why they went after him. But let's continue to go through this Ravens roster. We'll take a look at the offseason changes now with their pass catchers. So at wide receiver and at tight end. Well, tight end, they didn't make any changes, so they're staying neutral there. But at wide receiver, some changing of the guards. So Nelson Aguilar not back with this team. And they bring in veteran DeAndre Hopkins. Interested to see what kind of shape he's in at 33 years old, what he could mean for this team. But I think it's a solid addition. They could have definitely used another piece in their starters for the wide receivers, as we'll discuss. And then they did draft LeJontay Wester out of Colorado in the 6th round. Probably going to be more of a return man for them here in his rookie season. But this is a good, not great group of weapons in Baltimore, which has kind of become the status quo, I would say, over the last couple of years, really since they found Zay Flowers. I mean, before that, it was like, man, can we get someone for Lamar to get the ball to other than Mark Andrews? Well, Zay has emerged as that guy. And I think now with him at the level he's at, which we'll discuss him further, but him now with some other good complementary weapons that fall in nicely. Again, a good group of weapons that for me ranks 15th to 18th in the NFL today. Certainly good enough when paired with an MVP caliber quarterback to have explosiveness and get the job done and have one of the better offenses in the league. But yeah, Zay Flowers, to me, one of the more fun receivers to watch in the NFL. You just aren't going to find a whole lot of humans on planet Earth that can move the way Zay Flowers does. Not necessarily top speed. I mean, he is fast, don't get me wrong, but with Zay Flowers, it's much more about the other physical measurements: agility, acceleration, change of direction. This guy just warps in and out of his breaks. He bends the air around him, breaks ankles in his routes. It's really fun to watch. And he pairs that with very good technique in his routes as well, with plenty of deception with his arms to throw guys off and help his ability to break ankles and get open even better. But I would say one of the better overall separators in the NFL, and that athletic ability obviously is going to show up in his after-the-catch ability as well. Now, for a more undersized wide receiver where you are going to have a smaller catch radius and going to be a little bit more limited in terms of kind of, I don't want to say bailing the QB out, but making a play when you really need it, going over, mossing a DB, you know, the type of stuff that a lot of number one wide receivers in the league can do for your quarterback. Zay's going to be a little bit more hit or miss with that, but even then, I mean, he does have a 51% contested catch win rate in his time in the league, but that's on a much smaller sample size, just 16 contested catch targets last year. Lamar's not going to ask him to make those types of catches too often, as you shouldn't, but that was 48th in the NFL in contested catch targets. And for a guy of that profile, again, he doesn't have like blazing speed to truly like consistently take the top off of defenses. He is a vertical threat, but again, there's just like some little limitations there that maybe I don't ever see him being like a true number one in the case of like, yeah, he's a dominant alpha that you can really run your offense through. I do think he's a good enough player though at this point, kind of as we've discussed, that if he's your best wide receiver, you can be happy with it as long as you surround him with the right complementary group of skill sets. And I think the Ravens are in a pretty good spot to say that, yes, they are doing that. but there are some question marks. So you have Rashad Bateman as your number 2 wide receiver. He's not necessarily a question mark, though you could argue we're maybe still trying to figure out just how good Rashad Bateman is. I would just say he's very inconsistent. The ball skills from him can be very frustrating at times. Just when it feels like Rashad Bateman is breaking out, it feels like the drops and the lack of contested catch winning ability kind of just reemerge, and you're like, man, it's just he can't quite seem to settle in as like a bona fide number 2 wide receiver. He's probably more of a really high-end number 3, but he did, generally speaking, break out, I suppose, as like a good starting player last year, including playoffs. He ended up with 846 receiving yards. And the reason I said that we're maybe still figuring out just how good Rashad Bateman is that he played his best football, I would say, in the final month of the year, played well through the playoffs, and he did get a contract extension this offseason. And it was a 3-year, $37 million contract that, to me, kind of indicates that the Ravens actually feel like he's just starting to be the best version of himself. Like, I didn't necessarily put the up arrow on Rashad Bateman, for example, but I don't think it's crazy that he might emerge this year as more of a 1,000-yard type of quality number 2 wide receiver. And he's a nice compliment to Zay Flowers because he's got a little bit more size. He's really good over the middle of the field. He can make tough catches on back shoulders and towards the sideline. He's not really an X wide receiver. That's why they signed DeAndre Hopkins. But these two guys do have a combination of skill sets, Zay Flowers and Bateman, that I do think naturally plays off each other well. So if nothing else, he's a solid player in the mix here. And just maybe he can take another leap forward this year. But certainly you're going to have questions with your third wide receiver here, and just in terms of how good is DeAndre Hopkins at this point in his career. He's clearly been regressing, which is not his fault. Like, again, he's 33 years old. It's going to happen. But last year was a hard year for him, right? He starts on that Tennessee team that was just unwatchable offensively. That was kind of before the Titans really figured out just how bad Will Levis was, unfortunately. And then he gets traded to Kansas City right in the middle of the season, and it's hard for anybody. We saw this with Amari Cooper and the Bills last year too. It's hard to uproot your life, learn a new offense, establish a chemistry with a new quarterback you've never played with before, and become anything more than a wide receiver 3. To change teams midseason as a wide receiver, I think it's very hard to become a go-to part of the offense, and it just never fully came through with DeAndre Hopkins. And then he finishes the season with the worst play he's had in a long time, with a really brutal drop in the Super Bowl that was kind of the dagger, right, for that Chiefs team, if I'm remembering it correctly. Weren't they already down 3 scores, and then Hopkins dropped a ball on third down, and it was just well, there it is. There, it's over. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but I don't know. You go back to when he was 32 on that Titans team, he actually still played at a very high level. So now with an offseason back with a new team to kind of stay focused, motivated, to stay in good shape, knowing he could get a ring here in Baltimore, I don't think it's crazy that DeAndre Hopkins could play certainly better than he did last year and look more like a quality number 2 type of receiver. He is a guy that's never relied on his speed or anything like that. I mean, he was a 4.57 40 guy coming out. He's more of a savvy route runner, wins at the catch point, wins with physicality, that kind of stuff. So I'm excited to see him here in Baltimore. I think the most likely scenario is you're talking about a guy that's probably only going to get a couple targets every week, but they're going to be high leverage targets, back shoulder comebacks, backside digs, more high leverage targets. But that's a pretty nice spot for him as kind of the 4th leading target getter here, because you do have Mark Andrews, who we frankly probably should have talked about right after Zay Flowers. But I would imagine, Mark Andrews will be probably second on this team in targets. And he is frankly turning into another question mark. He has, I would say, regressed the last few years. In fact, in each of those last 3 seasons, his yards per route run has come down. He has kind of regressed back to where he started at the beginning of his career in terms of drop rate. That obviously showed up in the playoffs. But I think over the last couple of years, any Ravens fans would say, he just hasn't been that reliable pair of hands that he was in 2021 and 2022. He's still produces, he's still a mismatch problem. He's still got great size and pretty good speed for a tight end. He's still, to me, certainly a top 10 tight end, but I don't think you look at him as the superstar difference maker that he maybe was a few years ago. Fortunately, they have much better other receivers to better complement that, whereas Mark Andrews was like the only star player in this group of pass catchers a few years ago. So he's still a very nice impact here. He still contributes to a very good rating for this Ravens group of weapons. It's just you might have to live with some frustrating drops at times, and you're hoping that those don't come up in the biggest of moments as they did last year for this team. Obviously, just brutal. And then you do have Justice Hill. I would say, even if Derrick Henry is going to steal the show for this backfield, Justice Hill is their starting receiving downs back. And I don't think a lot of people realize he actually finished 10th in the NFL in receiving yards for running backs last year. And depending on how much you want to put into PFF grades, he was the 4th ranked receiving grade for running backs last year. I think it shows, man. He runs good routes. He's got really reliable hands. Didn't drop a single pass last year on 52 targets. That's exceptional, especially for a running back. He's got speed and big playability. He's awesome, and he's a great complement to Derrick Henry at this point, where you don't have to ask Derrick to play a lot of those third and pass situations. Really just kind of the perfect complement, and kind of gets in the mix here as a factor for this being a good group of weapons. And then we can kind of get into the real backups here. I think we could go to the tight end room there, though, because as I mentioned with the scheme breakdown, this team does run a lot of heavy personnel. So your guys here, Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar, are going to play a good bit, especially as Isaiah Likely is kind of hurt to start the season. He was questionable for week 1. It seems like it might be a couple weeks. I guess we'll find out, but we should get to see a little bit more Charlie Kolar at least week 1 here against the Bills. But I think this is certainly in the conversation for the best group of tight end 2 and 3 in the league. And both these guys are very different, and I like these guys in the mix here as well as complementary skill sets. So Isaiah Likely, when he's healthy, is the perfect kind of 12 personnel wing tight end type, because he is much more of a receiver than he is a tight end. If you actually want to take him and put his hand in the dirt and try to dig out defensive ends, it's going to be bad news for your run game. But in 12 personnel, it causes a lot of personnel issues for the defense, because he is a pretty good blocker from the wing if he can meet outside linebackers or even like slot corners and safeties. He blocks his ass off. It's more of just a size question, but if you can get him into the right body types in the run game, he's actually very good in that phase. And then, of course, like, you can come out and tell the defense you're going to run the ball, force them into base defense with 4 defensive backs out there, and then you step out with Isaiah Likely in the slot, where he just might be this team's best slot wide receiver. And then you end up with him either on a safety or a linebacker, and that's just a tremendous matchup advantage. So he very much gets in the mix scheme-wise and talent-wise himself. I don't really project him to ever get too much more, to become too much more than what he is today and be like a full-time starting tight end. But in a 12 personnel heavy offense as the Ravens are, I think he's a fantastic fit. And then Charlie Kolar, I would say, is probably more getting groomed to be the eventual Mark Andrews replacement here. I love Charlie Kolar. I was like stupid high on him coming out in the draft. I had him as a top 50 player per my draft grades that year. Hyper productive at Iowa State, runs great routes, just really fun character. He's been even a better blocker than I would have thought he would be at the pro level. I think he's developed in that phase. I really wouldn't have been stunned, honestly, if they decided to kind of move on from Mark Andrews, clear up some cap there, and then promote Charlie Kolar to be their starting tight end. I do wonder if that's going to happen at some point here. Probably not this season, but he's got 1 year left on that rookie contract. I think he's a fascinating name to monitor, whether that's here in Baltimore, maybe getting an extension and then moving on from Mark Andrews, or someone else looks at him as a potential kind of sneaky signing. But how he plays this year certainly is going to determine how the Ravens want to play that, right? And he's going to get an opportunity to get at least more playing time early as Likely is injured. And then we'll see what happens when Likely comes back. He'll probably resume the same role he played last year, where it's, still getting 15, 20 snaps a game, either as a backup to Mark Andrews, or he as well can be the 12 personnel guy instead of Isaiah Likely and get a little bit more of a blocking presence on the wing there. So a lot of flexibility with this tight end room. They really have all of the different skill sets you could possibly look for, and they contribute to a favorable ranking for the Ravens in this group as well. But then you're really getting into true depth conversations, especially at wide receiver with Tylan Wallace, true backup, Tez Walker, developmental deep threat. I don't think we see too much of those guys as long as everybody's healthy. I do think Tylan Wallace has answered the call when they've had to give him targets. Made a couple of nice catches last year. I liked his ability to make tough catches coming out of college. It's just the opportunities just haven't really been there here in Baltimore for one reason or another, but he's hung around, and I would be interested, at least if he had an increased role, if he could become more of a, capable wide receiver 4 type, or wide receiver 3 that's maybe the 4th most targeted player of your offense, that type of thing. And then, Tez Walker has size, speed to develop, but just got to learn how to catch the football. And then Wester, probably more of a return type of guy right now. Maybe you get him going on some gadget plays and stuff early and see if you can build anything off of that. Then you have your other running backs in this backfield here. Derrick Henry will still play some third downs. He is the better pass blocker than Justice Hill, and he's still a very good screen threat on earlier down stuff too, as kind of an extension of the run game stuff. But generally speaking, not really a natural receiving threat. And then Keaton Mitchell gets back healthy this year. He'll show up in just a second when we look at the running back offseason changes, but he's got a ton of juice out of the backfield. I don't know how many opportunities he's going to get there, but we might see some pot passes and screens go his way. But there's your group of weapons, and just like we said, let's take a look at the running back offseason changes here and shift our focus towards the backfield by the eyes of the run game here. And that addition of Keaton Mitchell, who missed essentially all of last season, came back a little bit late, played 3% of their snaps last year, but that is really the only addition that they made here. So I did say slightly upgraded at running back, just as I did at wide receiver, by the way. I can't remember if I actually said verbally for the audio podcast listeners following along here. But slightly upgraded at running back and at wide receiver there. But nothing major, and nothing major was required because you have King Henry here, the true ageless wonder in the NFL, I think. And it's funny because we wouldn't really say he's getting old for a lot of other positions at 31 years old. Like, that's kind of the starting point for most position groups where it's like, all right, he's starting to get towards the back nine, right? But at running back, we start to say that usually at like 28, 29 years old. And certainly looking at like workload, we say that around the 2,000 carry mark. And that's 2,000 carries on a career going back to college. Derrick Henry now is over 3,000 carries on his career going back to college. But I just don't think the laws of physics and natural regression apply to Derrick Henry. They quite literally do not make them like Derrick Henry. And at a position where guys just take a beating and get banged up and slow down, well, Derrick Henry just doesn't take big hits. Usually it's like he's taking guys to the ground with him as they kind of bounce off of him. And what I'm getting at here is I don't see any reason to believe that Derrick Henry isn't just going to be as good as he was last year. I don't see any regression on tape or any reason to believe that it's going to happen anytime soon, especially when he pairs his physical traits with just insane work ethic and taking care of his body. So, by running back standards, he is getting older, and at some point he's not going to be able to do this anymore, I think. But I'm not betting against this dude. I still have him, in my eyes, as the second best running back in the NFL, just behind Saquon Barkley there. And he, of course, is going to contribute to the Ravens here, ranking second to third at running back here for this series. And the only reason they're tied with the Falcons is because I love Bijan, but the Falcons also have Tyler Algier, who's one of the best RB2s in the league, whereas now, as we talk about the other guys getting carries here, they're not as established as a team like the Falcons with the other guy, the guy that's still going to get 20% of the touches or so, which in Baltimore, it's going to be Justice Hill and Keaton Mitchell, which are more like big play speed threats, frankly. And Justice Hill, I think, will be the primary RB2 depending on the health of Keaton Mitchell. We'll talk about Keaton Mitchell because he's exciting and has more upside than Justice Hill, but they do like Justice Hill, and he gets a lot of like those 3rd and 7 runs where they're trying to set up a 4th and short if they don't get the first down. So he is awesome when you got a little bit more space, you're running out of shotgun, or you're running outside zone as well. You can do that, but just kind of give him a lane, let him get some speed going, and then he's decent at making the first guy miss. I think he's an adequate backup, but not a great backup in terms of like actually navigating the trenches, being able to handle the full breadth of different runs that you can ask a guy to do like you can with Derrick Henry. And that mostly applies to Keaton Mitchell. I think Keaton Mitchell has a little bit more of an it factor in terms of vision and between the tackles capabilities. He's just one of these guys, honestly, that if you could just guarantee him a full bill of health, there's a lot of like Devon Achane in there. Like a lot of Devon Achane in there, where it's not just speed, it's actually a lot of toughness and contact balance at that speed to like run through arm tackles and good vision to navigate some sticky run situations. Like he's got a lot of talent. It's just the dude unfortunately cannot stay healthy, and that was the bill on him coming out. It's been the bill on him at the college or at the NFL level, and it's just kind of like anything you can actually get from Keaton Mitchell is house money type of deal. Do they need Keaton Mitchell? No, they're tied for the 2nd ranked running back room in the league with or without him. But God, if he could stay healthy, would he not be the perfect complement to Derrick Henry? I mean, imagine if you could stick Devon Achane next to Derrick Henry. There's something like that in Keaton Mitchell. So we'll see how much of a workload he can get. Would obviously be nice if he can stay healthy, and I think he's just the kind of guy that I think a lot of football fans are rooting for to see more of him. I guess unless your team is playing the Ravens that week, you might take a pass on that. But then they do have Rasheen Ali, who they drafted a year ago. I thought he was a balanced, day 3 running back prospect. Nothing too flashy there. A little bit of long speed, but he's got a couple guys ahead of him here that are going to roadblock him a good bit. But he did make the team as an RB4. Not everybody keeps an RB4. But there is your backfield, obviously a special one with King Henry there. But let's talk about our final offensive position group here, the offensive line. Some minor changes this offseason, nothing too concerning, but I did say slightly downgraded on the offensive line as they are losing one of their starters from last year, Patrick McCarry. Good player, got a nice contract for the Jags. Nobody that the Ravens should feel is impossible to replace, but they do need to find starting caliber guard play in his shoes. They also say goodbye to Josh Jones, who fortunately didn't have to play last year, but was a capable backup tackle for them. As far as additions, not too much. They draft Emory Jones in the 3rd round, who is going to start the season, unfortunately, on the non-football injury list. I think they're hopeful he can get back at some point here this season. And then Carson Vincent, a 5th round pick out of Alabama A&M. And then their kind of veteran swing tackle, Joseph Noteboom, gets brought in to, I guess, replace Josh Jones. But this is, to me, a fascinating offensive line. It's a good offensive line that's floor is pretty damn high. But I see a lot of potential for this group to be kind of a big difference maker from last year's Ravens team. A lot of this roster, as we'll see here, kind of is what it is. I think this, like I said, this could be the position group that really takes a leap forward, at least offensively. But even without projecting some of these younger guys at a higher level, you're still talking about a top 3rd offensive line in the league, ranking exactly that, 12th. Better in pass blocking for me, 9th to 10th. So top 10 in pass blocking, and then kind of middle of the pack, 14th to 15th for run blocking. So let's establish your kind of locked and loaded studs on this offensive line, and then we'll talk about the 3 kind of quote-unquote question marks here. So left tackle, you got Ronnie Stanley. Isn't what he used to be. I watch his tape, and I just don't see the same range in his kick slides, the same anchor. I mean, before the injuries piled up for him, he was at like an all-pro level, one of the best tackles in the league. He takes more losses than that, and I just don't see a great athlete as a run blocker. He's more just kind of like solid as a run blocker, but huge deal to get him back. I mean, Stanley, realistically, if he wanted a giant bag of cash, he could have probably outpriced the Ravens. He probably could have hit the market and demanded $30 million a year from teams like Tennessee and New England, but he wanted to win. He wanted to protect Lamar Jackson. I think it's admirable. He comes back and at this point is a big value for the Ravens to get their franchise left tackle back. And then the other proven commodity is Tyler Linderbaum, one of the best run-blocking offensive linemen in the league, and I love the way that they weaponize his athleticism as a pulling center. He is lethal. Probably the best like lead-blocking puller, especially on like sweeps and screens in the league right now. Just an unbelievable athlete, great targeting system, nasty upon arrival, and he's got a great get-off. He has natural leverage. He can really block any run scheme. He's a superstar run blocker for sure. In pass protection, he's a little bit smaller. So if you do isolate him one-on-one, he can take his losses. You can overwhelm him at times. He doesn't quite have the length and the reach to latch on to like elite athletes on the interior, but he's very smart and quick and a very good pass blocker as well. So he is a top 5 center in the NFL. I don't know that he's really going to continue to get much better. I feel like this is probably about the best version for a smaller offensive lineman that you could see. Not everybody certainly can become what Jason Kelce was for the Eagles. He was maybe a different animal. But if he's maxed out as the 4th best center in the league or so, I don't think anybody's going to really complain about that. But yeah, there's 3 other guys here that all have the up arrow for me, and how much they trend upwards is obviously going to go a long way towards this, going from a pretty solid to good offensive line to taking that jump towards maybe being a great difference-making offensive line. And really your 2 guards have more of a low floor, whereas at right tackle, I mean, Roger Rosengarten, I got to just hold my hand up and say I overthought it with him. I thought they reached on him in the draft. I was certainly worried about him starting as a rookie. I watched his tape at Washington, and this dude got obliterated by power at the college level. Listed at 300 pounds. I just didn't think he had the play strength to step in and hold up right away. And I wasn't entirely crazy. Like, when you do see him lose, it's not like he didn't give up any pressures all season long. When you did see him lose, it was still that anchor that showed up as an issue for him. But I drastically overstated how much it was going to hold him back, and I drastically undersold how great his technique was, how great of an athlete he was, and the idea that, yeah, he can still bulk up a little bit as just a 22-year-old, and I do think his play strength was better, not just in terms of anchoring against power, but in the run game as well. So he came in and was a just outstanding is like selling it short. He was a steal in the 2nd round. There are a lot of teams that have first-round tackles that they wish over the years played as well as Roger Rosengarten did, and this now can really just be the beginning. I think he can continue to bulk up. He really does remind me of like a young David Bakhtiari. I don't know that he'll reach quite those heights in terms of being the elite, pass protector in the league or anything like that. But Bakhtiari did come into the league at a similar size, and he struggled with play strength early on and got better and better and better. So like, obviously we'll just see kind of where that landing spot is for Rosengarten, but I certainly don't think he is what he is quite yet, right? Coming out of his rookie season. You're really excited about him. Just a tremendous draft steal for the Ravens. But like I said, the 2 guards do offer a little bit more of a lower ceiling and a potential issue. This is a weak link position, so you do want to see them hit some green lights with these guards here. But there's a ton of potential for these 2 guys as well to get excited about. And Daniel Falele, maybe not super low ceiling. Like, he did start at right guard last year. It's just, he was kind of week to week. Like, there was some weeks where you watched him and you're like, yeah, taking a 6'8", 360-pound guard is kind of awkward. And he struggles to like get his hands on quick pass rushers on the inside and can't always get leverage in the run game. Like, there was some weeks where you watched him and you were like, doesn't quite look right. And then there were some other weeks where it's like, boy, it's really fun to have a 6'8", 360-pound guard in there that can drive dudes off the ball and anchor against power rushers. So he's kind of an interesting discussion where it's like, is he actually just kind of maxed out as this sort of oversized matchup-dependent guard, or is he going to keep getting better and get better at kind of understanding how to win leverage and picking up stunts that I think he struggled at times in his first year as a starter? Like, there's theoretically a lot of room for improvement with him. So I think we'll continue to evaluate just the type of player he is. But again, he was like, their starting right guard, and they did just fine with that. You're hoping he can get a little bit better. And then at left guard, you have Andrew Voorhees projected to start here. 7th round pick in 2023, but don't let the draft status fool you. This guy would have been a 3rd or a 4th round pick at least if he wasn't going to miss his entire rookie season. And might have snuck into more of the 2nd round, frankly, because he had awesome college tape, a people mover in the run game, tough as shit, a lot to like in this player. But it's been kind of a slow road to recovery and playing time for him. At the end of the day, you can't deny that the traits of a quality starting guard are there. And there's a lot of reason to get excited that this now is the year where he doesn't have a Patrick McCarry ahead of him. He's secured this job. He's healthy. This is the year now that he's going to break through. And frankly, the tape when he has played has been pretty solid. Like 3 out of his 4 starts have been pretty damn solid. So I don't think he's gotten out there and it's been like alarming tape. It's just they kind of knew that Patrick McCarry was a more established, ready to go player there. And they didn't need to go to Voorhees after they kind of figured out this offensive line. But the opportunity's there now. Honestly, I see a lot of like Kevin Zeitler in his game, just in terms of physical traits and some of that kind of toughness and dickhead mentality in the run game that you look for. I'm excited to see Voorhees here. I think he especially brings a ton of upside to this overall offensive line. Now, as far as true depth, you've got Joseph Noteboom, has really fallen off since the Rams paid him. I don't know if this is a took his money and ran scenario or if he hasn't been healthy or what, but there was a lot of excitement for him going back 2 or 3 years ago, but he has really struggled when he has played for the Rams, so he's kind of in that stage of his career where he's trying to get back on track. Hard to know exactly what he would be, frankly, if he did play. But he does have tackle guard flexibility. And then you have Ben Cleveland, who has played a little bit here, but as much as I liked him as a draft prospect, I can't hang my hat on any sort of established play from him. He's missed a lot of blocks in his time here and obviously had plenty of an opportunity to kind of carve out a guard spot on this offensive line and could not do it. He is still on this team, so maybe this is the year for Ben Cleveland, who is just a giant refrigerator of a lineman, but hasn't been able to put it all together there. You've got Corey Bullock, who I'm frankly not too familiar with. He makes it as a backup. And then Carson Vincent was your classic traits-based developmental small school tackle. You probably don't want to see him much in year 1, but he had all of the kind of requisite measurables and tape against poor competition to roll the dice on in the 5th round. We'll see if they can bring him along. Good dart throw to make. And then Emory Jones was a 3rd round pick. He's on the non-football injury list. I liked him as a guard convert. I would imagine that's what they have in mind for him, is either as someone to compete with one of these starting guard jobs if either Voorhees or Falele struggle, or potentially getting groomed as the long-term tackle behind Ronnie Stanley, but just someone that had pretty clunky feet that I definitely saw better as a guard. But I did like his overall game, so I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting in the mix within the next year or two for one of these guard spots. But yes, there is your offensive line, a solid unit with some young players that just need to hit some green lights with their development here this year, but pretty damn complete offense. In fact, the Ravens come out, as we recap this side of the ball, as my 2nd overall offense, 4th in passing game, 2nd in run game. This unit hummed last year, should be more of the same this year. But let's go to the other side of the ball, and we'll start with the defensive line and take a look at their offseason changes there. So on the interior of the defensive line, I said slightly downgraded. They do lose Michael Pierce, who had a very limited role for them, but was still very good in that big body nose tackle role when he did play 21% of the snaps last year, and not really much to replace him. John Jenkins, still playing here at 36 years old, in theory could step into the shoes of Michael Pierce, like physically, like probably would fit into the same cleats that Michael Pierce left behind, but not the same player. And they did take Aeneas Peebles in the 6th round, a guy I like that we'll talk about here. But again, slightly downgraded on the interior of the defensive line, but hoping for an upgraded edge group here, as they are the team that elects to pull the trigger on Mike Green. And let's just get this conversation out of the way now before we can just focus on football with this defensive line. And I almost feel an obligation to talk about it because a lot of the networks just stay away from it. Whereas I don't have a boss, I am free to discuss this as I see it. And look, 2 sexual assault cases. He heads to Virginia with a no-nonsense policy. They kick him out after a second incident comes up. He has to play his college ball at Marshall. Stays out of trouble there, but then goes into the pre-draft process, has some pretty alarming interviews, and all 32 teams did their due diligence here, and a clear top 10 talent in the draft falls to the ass end of the 2nd round. Something's up, man. This to me is not some conspicuous cloudy situation. This is the Ravens saying, well, someone's going to take him eventually. It might as well be us so that we don't have to play him against the Chiefs or the Bills. And we will kind of sell our souls to the devil to try to win a Super Bowl because we're desperate here. And that's just how I see it. Ravens fans are going to be pissed about it. They have been pissed at me about it. I've talked about this kind of at length at this point. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to sit here and praise them for stealing Mike Green at the end of the 2nd round. He was there for a reason. I do understand why they took him. Super talented football player, as we'll discuss. But like I said, I'm also not going to just ignore it. I feel very fortunate to have this platform where I can have open conversations with you guys about these types of players and incidents. But that is all I'm going to say about it. From here forward, we are going to focus on the football conversation with Mike Green in the building here. And when it is a football conversation, it is an upgraded edge group, as we will discuss. But let's take a look at this defensive line. And honestly, a big reason that this team did decide to pull the trigger on Mike Green is this unit has not been good enough. They just haven't. And even with Mike Green as a rookie here, they don't have the most amazing rankings, but it is a better unit. And it should be in a pretty, at least a much better position to get that critical pressure that they need for this defensive front in the biggest games when they need them. But I have them right around the middle of the pack for overall defensive line ranking, 14th to 15th. Still below average for pass rush, though, 17th to 21st. D-line run defense, on the other hand, much closer to top 10, ranking 5th to 11th there. But this is a very, very balanced defensive line with depth and a bunch of different guys that they can go to, but they have lacked that true number 1 difference-making player. And unfortunately, we'll start with their best guy here, Nnamdi Madubuike. He was more of that guy in 2023. He produced like a number 1 type of pass rusher from the interior there. He was a super disruptive, game-changing player in 2023. They gave him the contract extension, and sometimes this just happens, right? Like he had been on this team for 4 years. He was a pretty good player, but he had that huge breakout year. He's kind of a good example for a larger macro discussion in terms of rating players and how you should perceive like individual big seasons in the NFL, which is a small sample size sport. Like if in basketball or baseball, if a guy had a great 16-game stretch, you'd say, oh, he just got hot for a little bit. In football, fans are prone to crown a guy as one of the best players at their position in that sport because of a season like that. And Madubuike came back after that year, and he didn't go all the way back, of course, to what he was as more of a, rotational third-ish type of guy. He didn't go all the way back to that, but he was much more of just like a good number 2 player, a pretty damn good pass rusher, and a pretty good run defender that is a little bit smaller and at times can get boxed out of the run, but generally speaking, finds the ball and is an impact in that phase. I think there was a hope that he was only going to continue to get better, and maybe we're going to have more of that. Let's just say like Quinnen Williams or Jeffrey Simmons caliber interior D tackle. That would have been the next level for him to really establish himself at that level. He probably took a step backwards in that sense, more towards being like an Osa Odigizua, or maybe like what Stephon Tuitt was. Ravens fans familiar with him back in his Steelers days, but still a really good player. He is right now on paper their best player though, and that is really frankly where the Mike Green hopes come in, that he can emerge as your dominant number one piece, and then Madubuike can, be a bigger mathematical impact as a 2. But as we sit here today, still going to be looked at as their number 1, but they do also have a couple of other like pretty good number 2 guys, a bunch of guys that can win and are good players, but when you have to have a bucket, can they really get after the quarterback and change the game for you? Not necessarily, but those guys are Odafe Owe and Kyle Van Noy. Honestly, I'll talk about Kyle Van Noy first. He's been the more productive player overall than Odafe Owe over the last couple of years since he really broke through here at 33 or 34 years old. Very interesting player where you would typically look at a guy this age and be like, well, yeah, it's going to fall off, or he's on the back end of his career, he's getting worse. Last 2 years of Kyle Van Noy's career here in Baltimore, he's played the best ball of his life, and he's spent the majority of his career as that kind of like hybrid outside backer where he wasn't really let loose to just go win as a pass rusher. And make no mistake about it, the Ravens will still drop him into coverage, and he's a huge weapon out of those blitzing fronts we described where they do like to drop these athletic edge rushers into coverage. That's still something you can do with him, absolutely. He's one of the better coverage dropping edge rushers in the league because he's played more coverage than any edge rusher in the league, for sure. And that experience makes him good at getting off blocks and finding the ball in the run game too. But man, he's shown like he was probably misutilized throughout the course of his career as someone that can actually like beat you with finesse. He's got, a decent kind of long arm bull rush to kind of push the pocket. He's great as a contained rusher. Like he is just a savvy, good pass rusher. Not going to wow you with traits, wow you with power or anything like that, but just steady, good player that, eventually Father Time will come for. Maybe that's this year, maybe it's not. But kind of one of these players where, okay, well, if he didn't regress at 33 and a half years old last year, he had the best year of his career, frankly. 56 pressures and double-digit sacks. Why is that necessarily going to happen at 34 and a half years old? And then Odafe Owe, opposite of him, very similar caliber player that does have a lot more traits, but a lot less technique. So different style of player for sure. And because of those traits, I would love to sit here and say, he's only going to continue to get better and the up arrow should be on him and maybe he can become a true number 1. I don't know, man. There are a lot of guys of his kind of player archetype that settle in around this age 26, age 27, where they've had a lot of success as a hyper athlete that can win with bend around the corner, a little bit of power, pretty good run defender. But I think there's a certain point where, like, if you don't fully develop the understanding of how to dissect offensive tackles as a pass rusher and, like, understand the art of rushing the passer and how to stem moves together and consistently dominate with the traits that he does have, there's probably a certain point in time where it's just not going to happen. And even him coming out of Penn State, it's like, well, he doesn't really have a whole lot of moves. Certainly not ones that he actually, like, sets up and stems things together. You'll see him occasionally splash with a spin move or a cross chop, but it's certainly not consistent enough to get overly excited about it. But yeah, he falls right in line with Van Noy and probably Madubuike. It's like, all right, he's a 2. Where's your number 1? Where's that math changer? Where's that guy that for a team that loves to scheme up blitzes? Where's the guy that slides are going to that guy? He's going to command chip help. He's going to change the math of your pass rush. They haven't had that guy. That's why they draft Mike Green. He could be that guy. Crazy fun tape coming out of Marshall. And one of these pass rushers that even if he's listed at a smaller weight, I think he plays at about 248, 250, plays so much stronger than a guy at that size. So he's allowed to have the speed and the bend and the quickness and agility of a like athletic speed rusher, but he doesn't, trade that for power and play strength. He's got the best of both worlds there. I'm certainly not saying he's Micah Parsons or Von Miller, but those guys had that trait right there where they're listed at, 250-ish. So they can move and bend like a 245-pound edge rusher, but they can hold up like a 260-pound guy like an Odafe Oweh can. It's unique. And then, unlike an Oweh, talk about Mike Green, who has the whole bag of pass rush moves, not just in his back pocket, but also in his mind. He understands how to set things up. He understands how, if he wins with a cross chop on one rep, how that's going to set up an inside counter. If he beats you with the bull rush, that's going to set up the ghost move. He's got all the moves, but he knows how to get to them. Like I said, this guy, without character concerns, would have been a top 10 pick in this draft. I don't have really any hesitations in saying that in terms of a tape evaluation. And hell, he's even like pretty savvy at getting off blocks and finding the ball in the run game. There's a reason most Ravens fans are pretty freaking excited that they got him where they did, because, a team typically picking in the late 20s, they ain't getting an opportunity to draft a talented player like this unless you're the Eagles and the Saints hand you a top 10 pick for another guy with character concerns and Jalen Carter. Anyway, sky's the limit for Mike Green. And I know I said we were going to stick with the football. I can't speak on whether or not he for sure did what he was accused of. All I can say is that I think the best you can do is hope that he's going to be a stand-up citizen moving forward, that he can contribute to this football team and contribute to his community and mature into a young adult now. But needless to say, if what he's accused of is true, it's not entirely unlikely that something else pops up with this guy. So time will tell with Mike Green. But there is one other core starter that we haven't talked about here. That was all a very pass rush oriented conversation. But there is one more core starter on the interior with Travis Jones, who's much more of an impact as a run defender, but he has really come along nicely. I thought he was such a steal when they got him. If he went at the end of the first round when he was coming out, I wouldn't have blinked an eye, just because it's so hard to find guys with the run defense tape with his size and traits that he had coming out of school. And he was good earlier on as a run defender, but he's continued to develop, and he's more than ready to fully fill the shoes as their nose tackle with Michael Pierce retiring here. And I would just say he's a top 10 run defending nose tackle, and he actually has like a decent first step and can compress the pocket and contribute as a rusher as well. So he'll play on third downs too, but they're going to put a focus on keeping him fresh for those early downs, where he can make his impact as a run defender. And you talk about this team having roughly a top 10 grade for the D-line run defense there. Travis Jones is a huge part of that, with a bunch of other solid players around him is how you get that. And then you get into your true depth here. Let's stay on the edge. Tavius Robinson, 4th round pick a few years ago, has settled in as a very quality early down run defender. Nothing too much more to add on him, but he's been, I would say, exactly what you look for in that draft range. Whereas David Ojabo, unfortunately, has not been what they were hoping for. He was another kind of second round dart throw, someone that, was available for different reasons than Mike Green, but similar idea where you're, getting a guy in the second round that in other circumstances would have gone much earlier. David Ojabo suffered a pretty bad injury at his pro day. Certainly would have been like a top 15 draft pick or so, but he falls to the middle of the second round. The Ravens take a gamble on him. And I think, unfortunately, this is one of those situations where, you see like a Will Johnson this year, for example. Every year there's these like injury prone players that are available later, and us draft fans observing from a far out perspective, we're like, oh my God, what a value. This guy's going to turn into a superstar. And I thought that was going to happen with David Ojabo. I think this is a case where, man, the medicals, like sometimes these doctors know more than us. And the Ravens were right to take a risk on this, but it did not work out. And I just don't think he's been able to get his explosiveness back. He hasn't been able to stay out there long enough to actually work on his craft and develop. And it's just hard to imagine that happens at this point. Maybe, right? This was a guy coming out with like crazy athletic traits and bend and some pass rush moves too. But It's just at this point, like, you kind of just rotate him in there for a little bit of everything and see if he can maybe start to build up some momentum. He's still pretty young, just 25 years old, but heading into the final year of his rookie contract, and hard to project too much from him. And then you have Adisa Isaac as well, late third round pick last year, actually. He's currently on the IR. I don't think he's done for the season. Didn't play too much last year. I liked him as an edge 3 prospect. Good, heavy-handed, stand-up edge. Fits their system. Thought he maybe got a little bit overrated. Had a lot of second-round buzz. A lot of people thought he was a steal in that draft. I thought end of the third, early fourth was the right range on a guy like this. That's probably never going to be an impact starter for you, but can he be another Tavius Robinson, for example, as a solid early down run defender? I think that's kind of what you expect from Isaac. Hopefully they can get him back, and then Robinson and Isaac can be solid contributors off the edge on early downs. And then you have some interior depth. You got Broderick Washington, who's going to play a lot because he's kind of flexible. He can sub in for Travis Jones and do a little bit of run defense stuff, sub in for him on third downs and be the other interior rusher with Jones catching a breather there. And then he can play for Madubuike on earlier downs too, so you keep Madubuike fresh for pass rush downs. But just kind of a balanced, perfect kind of DT3, frankly. So you're happy you have him there. He's just not too much of an impact player. John Jenkins gets brought in here probably to eat up some early down nose tackle snaps, goal line, late game scenarios where you got to get a stop. Like he'll play a very limited role as a 36-year-old, but hopefully you keep him fresh and get off some blocks in that role. And then Aeneas Peebles, got to spend a little bit of time on him at least. Very talented, quick, undersized, pass rushing defensive tackle that I liked a lot. I mean, and that's kind of underselling it. Like I liked him a lot. I had a third round grade on him. Was stunned that he fell this far. I don't know if there was any kind of medical issues with him, but he is undersized, so he's not going to be for everybody. But man, I mean, I'll just say it. I wouldn't be surprised if he was the second best pass rushing interior player on this team this year. And that's not saying too much, but this guy had a lot of skill getting after the quarterback. He had a decent bull rush, but a great first step. Excellent club and go move, where he'll take that primary hand, slam it into your side with some pretty good power and some core power as well, and then use swipes to kind of go oppo with that momentum, force you left, swipe through to the right, or vice versa. I think that'll play at the next level. So see if you can get out there. Definitely a 6th-round pick to keep an eye on for sure. But there's your defensive line. A very solid unit. The floor is very, very high, as it's been for a few years. But really hoping that Mike Green can be more of a difference-making pass rusher for you and maybe get this into being more of a top 10 type of defensive line that you feel their impact a little bit more in the playoffs. Because right now, it's a good D-line. No real complaints, but is anybody really scared of the Ravens defensive line, or have you been scared of the defensive line? No, you're lying to yourself if you say otherwise there. Maybe Mike Green can change that. But let's go to the linebackers. Very interesting unit here, but we got to look at their offseason changes first. Just kind of shuffling of backups. Malik Harrison played a nice rotational run defending role for them. Even played a little bit of edge at times. So he goes interdivision to Pittsburgh, and then Chris Board leaves as well, and they draft a developmental Teddy Buchanan in the 4th round. But like I said, it's an interesting linebacker room where you have an established superstar, still probably the number 2 ranked linebacker by most people in the league, though I do think Zach Bond actually played at a higher level than Roquan last year, and Roquan might just get passed up by Zach Bond because he's that good. But at least for now, I would rank Roquan as the 2nd best overall linebacker in the game today. That's fantastic, but then you've got one of the bigger question marks as your LB2. So how does that land necessarily in terms of ranking this group and how big of an impact you're going to get there? Very hard to say, right? If this were a different position group that had more talented units towards the top 5 and the top 10 of that position group's respective rankings, this would probably push them a little bit further down the board. But at linebacker, where there's just not a lot of great linebacker rooms in the league today, I do still have the Ravens despite major LB2 questions, as the third overall unit for linebackers, second in linebacker coverage, and then ranking 5th to 6th for linebacker run defense. But let's get into these guys a little bit further. I don't think I need to spend too much time on Roquan Smith. Like I said, the second best linebacker in the game today, a little bit smaller. So you look at a guy like Zach Bond that can do a lot of the same stuff he does with even more size, and you maybe feel his impact even a little bit more. But man, Roquan just sees the game so well. He's so athletic. He tackles well. He's, for a 6'1", 233-pound linebacker, he's much better at getting off blocks than he should be. I wouldn't say he's an overall elite of the elite run defender, up there with what Fred Warner's doing, like what I do think Zach Bond did last year, what we saw from guys like Bobby Wagner or Luke Kuechly in their prime. I don't think he's quite on that level, but maybe just a smidge behind him. Still one of the best run defending linebackers in the game. But from a coverage perspective, absolutely. He's got the zone IQ. He can turn and run in man coverage, 100%. So Roquan's a superstar, perennial all-pro caliber talent. And then you have Trenton Simpson, complete wild card for this linebacker unit, a guy with all of the traits in the world. This is a built-in-a-lab Madden create-a player. And in fact, I think he gets a lot of hype because he probably is a guy that a lot of people that play Madden have a lot of fun using in their video game. But as we know, the linebacker position is even more about the mentals than it is about the physicals, and Trenton Simpson is absolutely still figuring things out, as he was at Clemson, where they basically, he hardly played linebacker at Clemson. He just played run and chase at various different positional formations at Clemson. And that all led to him getting benched last year. They did not feel like he was consistent enough with his run keys, staying in the right run lanes. His benching was certainly at least in correlation with the defense getting better, and probably part of the causation of their defense getting better. But another offseason for a young player where so often it does take 3 years for these young linebackers to really figure things out. And I think the hope is at least he can get up to speed enough now, kind of with a little bit of a fire lit under his ass, with the benching, with another offseason, that he can at least do what Patrick Queen did, where, okay, Roquan's there's your LB1. He's going to play with the discipline. He's going to get everybody lined up and be the captain and be the green dot guy. Can Trenton Simpson just see the game fast enough that he can tap into his traits and be something closer to what Patrick Queen was when he left and what he is today for the Steelers? That's reasonable to see him get into that level. And certainly Patrick Queen earlier in his career, if he wasn't a first-round pick, he would have probably been benched earlier in his career. He took a long time to be more of an adequate overall player. So I do still put the up arrow on Trenton Simpson, but there's no guarantee that he does figure it out. Now, if he does, the Ravens could end up being the best linebacker room in the league, because we did the Niners deep dive. Fred Warner's in the same spot where their LB2 is a huge question mark. At the end of the day, they're still going to get good play from this linebacker room. Roquan Smith is the rising tide that lifts all boats here, but you might have a player at this level of defense that's certainly more inconsistent and hurts you more some weeks than others. But as far as depth, there's not a ton of guys to really get all that excited about. Teddy Buchanan, 4th round pick, was a little bit rich for me. Pretty concerning tape at California, but the guy clearly has the athletic measures that you look for, that you say, we bring him in, let him run and chase on special teams, see how he can handle the game from NFL coaching in a year or two. But I don't even know if he'd be the first man in. That might be Jake Hummel, who's played a little bit more in the NFL, or even Jay Higgins coming out of Iowa, makes this team undrafted, which Higgins was my dead last ranked linebacker in this draft class, 21 out of 21 that I watched. Horrible athlete, but he at least is one of the better in this class at getting off blocks. And if you get tired of a Trenton Simpson running around like a headless chicken with no idea what he's looking at, and you just want a guy that's going to be in the right place, hopefully at the right time, Higgins maybe might be their choice to get out there. But yeah, it's Roquan Smith and a whole lot of question marks in this linebacker room. Not necessarily ideal, but you could certainly do a lot worse, as many teams do at this linebacker position. There's a few teams in the league with 2 Trenton Simpsons and certainly no Roquan Smith. So hard to complain too much if you're a Ravens fan there. But let's go to the best unit on this defense and maybe the most exciting position group on this team, I guess, outside of quarterback. But this secondary could be legendary. I don't mean to jump the gun too much before we talk about the offseason changes, but I tweeted this out a few months ago when they signed Jair Alexander, that this unit has a chance to be like Legion of Boom, no-fly zone status in the secondary. We mentioned the offensive line is a position unit with a ton of upside to be better than what they had last year. That was at least on the offensive side of the ball. I'm looking at this secondary. I mean, outside of a Mike Green, dominant rookie year, this could be a difference-making season from this secondary. But that all stems from the offseason changes that we'll talk about here. So at cornerback, I mean, if all they did was sign Chidobe Awuzie and let Brandon Stevens walk, that alone would be an upgrade. I'm sorry if any Jets fans are watching, but Ravens fans were celebrating that the team didn't bring him back, let alone the fact that they might get a comp pick for him because the Jets threw $36 million at him. I don't get it. Stevens leaving is addition by subtraction. They did lose Tre'Davious White, who stepped out there late last season. That's a footnote. And then, like I said, they signed Chidobe Awuzie, which at the time, like before the Jair Alexander signing, that was like a nice like veteran CB3 option for them. But then Jair Alexander becomes available, who the Ravens have been like tied to for a long time, right? Him and Lamar, Louisville buddies. And it was a pretty easy decision for Jair, who probably could have gotten more money elsewhere, to come to Baltimore and really complete this secondary. We'll get there, though. Obviously, at cornerback, I'm saying massively upgraded. This is one of the more upgraded units in the league. And that's even with noting that both of their 6th-round rookies are done for the season. That's pretty rough. Bilal Cohn and Robert Longerbeam. Another footnote there for the cornerback section. But then at safety, some change here as well. So they do lose Ardarius Washington to an injury, tore his Achilles like a few months ago. It's not ruled out that he could return, but we're talking about a defensive back trying to rush back from an Achilles tear. So for all intents and purposes, I'm treating him as done for the year. Maybe they could get him back out there late, but it might not matter by then for Washington because they take Malachi Starks in the 1st round, and that was before the Achilles tear on Darius Washington. Looking back on it, thank God they did take Malachi Starks. Not only was it a great draft pick, but if you're going to lose your starting safety to an Achilles injury, pretty damn nice to have a Malachi Starks ready to plug into that spot. And then the only other losses there are guys that we mentioned, like they already basically cut ties with them last season. Eddie Jackson was cut midseason and Marcus Williams was benched midseason. So a lot of kind of just footnotes with quote-unquote losses in the secondary. But yeah, let's break this unit down, man. Needless to say, they come out as my number 1 ranked secondary in the league. They're great in run defense, too. They come in the top tier for DB run support just as much as they do for coverage. But where do you want to start? Throw a dart. Pick your poison. I think Marlon Humphrey would be the appropriate place to start. They're CB1. Still playing at the top of his game. Honestly, like quietly had a bit of a career year last year, in my opinion. In a zone-heavy system like this, and as a guy that they do ask to play a ton from the slot, his like reception percentage allowed is never going to be crazy high, and he was at 62%, which is very middle of the road. But he had 16 pass breakups last year, including 6 interceptions. And he had 2 forced fumbles as well. Got back to the peanut punch that he is. He is one of the better peanut punchers in the entire league. So he's just like a game-changing force, whether they want to play him outside or inside. You love that flexibility. Not the most like insane athlete to be like this sticky man-to-man guy that's going to shut down number 1 receivers or anything like that. But he can hold his own in those types of settings. But that's obviously an excellent starting point with everything he brings to the table, talent-wise and flexibility-wise. But then I think we probably go to Nate Wiggins next if we're staying in the cornerback room. I do think he's going to be their primary CB2. I'm curious to see how this all plays out, though, because a big part of the McDonald's system, and we saw this at times last year, though they got away from it as injuries piled up, is the use of dime packages where they take Kyle Hamilton, play him as a slot corner, and then play two other safeties behind them. That's basically the base defense for the Chargers. For example, I think the Seahawks have plans of doing a lot of that, spending a high pick on someone like Nick Emanwari, all within this same system. I think that's something they're still interested in doing, but now that Ardarius Washington is hurt, that could change how they play this defense. So, like, the reason I bring this up is if they were going to do a lot of dime, three safety stuff on earlier downs where Hamilton's down in the nickel, I believe the idea was Jair Alexander is going to be more of a third down corner for us, limit his playing time because he's a guy that never stays healthy, limit his exposure to injury, keep him out of run defense situations where he's not taking as much of a beating, and then Nate Wiggins would be your starting CB2 in that scenario. And then, of course, Humphrey's more on the outside. Well, I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case anymore. And this team is probably going to live more in a standard nickel defense with Marlowe in the slot. And in which case, you would have to talk about Jair Alexander as your CB2. But either way, either order you want to talk about these guys, let's just talk about Nate Wiggins first here. Super exciting young rookie. Totally worth the first round pick they spent on him. Just the type of guy that it's rare to find a guy with this length, this speed, his energy, the confidence he has as a corner. Hell, there was a lot of notes that I had on his college eval that he has a little bit of that, like, Jair Alexander, like, kind of, dickhead's not the right word, but that stubborn confidence that a lot of corners have. They're different body types, but as a Packers fan, watching Nate Wiggins reminded me a lot of Jair Alexander, and now they're both here together. Like, it's super exciting. But I think the sky's the limit for Nate Wiggins. I certainly wouldn't predict that he is the best of these three corners this year. That's obviously, like, would be a ridiculous prediction when you're talking about being better than Marlon Humphrey and Jair Alexander, who are top 7, top 8 corners in the NFL. Both of them. But he has the potential to reach that, and when he played in his rookie season, he looked really good for a rookie corner that these guys typically struggle more often than not. So, like, passed the eye test for me in his rookie year, all the traits, the first-round pedigree, a defense that can develop guys. Like, he has become a little bit more of a forgotten man because there's so many big names on this secondary, and the flashy new toys, Malachi Stark stepping in here too with Jair Alexander. But do not forget that Nate Wiggins is here, and he has tons of potential. And if, you know, he wasn't overshadowed by, like, what Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean did, we'd probably be talking a lot more about Nate Wiggins out of that class. So, big fan of him and what he could achieve here. And then, yeah, you got Jair Alexander, which it's bizarre that he's the third guy we're talking about here. Now, you can't talk about Jair Alexander without questioning his durability. The dude has consistently missed about 12 games over the last 4 years of his career. And that's why I did kind of like the idea initially of him really only playing on third downs. I'm not quite as big of a fan of this potential setup where they're probably going to be in more of a nickel style defense with three cornerbacks out there more often. I think there's a much better chance that Jair Alexander gets hurt and isn't available in January, which that should be the focus for these Ravens. I don't know how they could possibly swing it, whether it's, you know, playing Sanauzi Kane as a dime safety on earlier downs, or rotating Jair with Chidobe Awuzie, signing another safety to do that type of three safety stuff. I really think the smart thing to do would be to kind of stick with that philosophy, because otherwise you're just counting on blind luck that Jair Alexander can get through the season. So you got to kind of take this conversation with a grain of salt here. But the thing with Jair is nobody really talks about him anymore as a top 10 corner. And I think that's fair because of the time missed. But when he's out there, he's a top 5 corner in the league. He still absolutely has it. He's only 28 years old. It's pretty hard to find at a position this volatile. It's pretty hard to find a player over the last 7 seasons that's more consistently sticky in coverage than Jair. He can absolutely play man coverage. He's got speed. He's got like some of the most fluid hips and agile feet that you could ever find at the cornerback position, and he's really a smart off zone corner as well. He's going to fit this system really, really well. So obviously, if he stays healthy, that's where you have the potential for this to be like the no-fly zone Broncos secondary, or even the Legion of Boom secondary. Like, this, on paper to me, is shaping up to potentially be the best secondary I've ever seen in my life. We can't go that far before these guys have played a game together, but if they hit some green lights there, if Jair stays healthy, if Nate Wiggins takes a step forward, if Malachi Starks is the rookie safety we think he can be, it is not crazy, in my opinion, to make a statement like that. But obviously an exciting cornerback trio. If and when Jair does get hurt, you do have Chidobe Awuzie, who they were prepared to make their CB3 before Jair got hurt. And frankly, him as a 5th member of your secondary and that outside corner, still better than Brandon Stevens was last year. Awuzie is also a guy that's just missed a lot of time for injury, but he has slowed down when he's been on the field. But at least between Jair and Chidobe Awuzie, the floor is still quite high there. It's just, obviously, Awuzie is not the player Jair is. Can't move like him. After that, though, if you start to deal with more injuries, that's where this team it could potentially be dangerously thin, because they lose a pair of 6th-round rookies before the season ever starts. Bilal Cohn, Robert Longerbeam. You got TJ Tampa. Look, he, to me, was an overhyped prospect because of his height and speed. I mean, he's a stiff, zone-only corner that doesn't tackle. Maybe he's developing here. Not someone I would be really excited about if I were running this Ravens team, of him having to play right now. But obviously, we got to circle back to the starters at safety here. So you have Kyle Hamilton, superstar, top 5 safety in the league. Impressed me last year playing more safety, especially in the second half of the year. You know, I think Ravens fans have been disappointed in my eagerness to crown him as a top 5 safety, but it's really just because up until like parts of last season, he hasn't really been a safety. He's been a nickel. He's been like this slot corner, dime safety hybrid guy that is like perfectly equipped for his skill set. But I really don't think until last season we hadn't really seen him make more plays from the back end, trigger with urgency against the run, and like be a legitimate star safety when they do ask him to play a 2 shell or quarters from the top. I still like him better around the line of scrimmage, where he can use his length and playmaking instincts. I still think the best use for Kyle Hamilton is as a nickel, but he's shown that, like, okay, if you can do all that stuff, and they'll still find ways to get him around the line of scrimmage, because like they do run a lot of cover 3. Starks will rotate high, Hamilton will come down in the box. They'll still find ways to use him in those ways, and he'll make his impact there. But as long as he's just like a pretty dang good deep safety, which I would say he is, on top of all the other stuff, now I think I've checked enough boxes in my mind to say, yeah, we're looking at a, Pro Bowl caliber top 5 safety in the league. But obviously, he's become a household name and another superstar player in the secondary. And then, dude, Malachi Starks could be that too. Malachi was one of the better overall football players in this draft. It's just, as we saw with Kyle Hamilton and have seen with this safety position seemingly year after year at this point, these guys can fall in the draft. And the Ravens saw Starks sitting there in the mid-20s, and we're like, yeah, I mean, we can't let this guy go any further. And this dude's he's just a defensive back, man, for lack of a better term. He's probably going to play a lot of single high stuff here. I think he can absolutely handle that. He didn't do a ton of it at Georgia just because they liked to put him around the line of scrimmage, get involved. Georgia likes to just take their deep safety and just play him like 20 yards off. Kind of a waste to do that with Malachi Starks, but I think he can handle it. I think he's got the IQ and the range on the back end to be more of a post single high safety, but he can man up guys from the slot. He can blitz. He can play the run. Checks every box you could look for. Really quick athlete, good speed, Love Malachi Starks. I think, it's any NFL defensive back. You got to be careful just penciling him in as a star player. It can happen, but I do think his floor should be pretty damn high. He is one of these guys where it's just like, it's really hard to imagine him not being a 3-contract NFL player, barring injury. And you got to be careful saying that. And I don't use that cliche too often, but definitely think it applies to Malachi Starks. So love that draft pick. Love how he has, turned into a need. I do think when they drafted him, the plan was 3 safety based defense. I don't know that that's going to be the case anymore. We'll see how that all plays out. Certainly with Darius Washington likely going down for the year, though, it turned into a need, and God, are they happy to have him. But yeah, like I said, a big reason I don't think they're really going to stick with the dime 3 safety stuff at this point is, they'd have to be really impressed by Sanauzi Kane, a 7th-round pick that's hardly played here, to get into that. Maybe they are. They haven't really signed anybody here. Not that there's a bunch of free agents out there to fill in this group, but obviously they've already suffered 1 injury at safety. If they were to suffer another, you'd start to maybe have a weak link there for sure. It's literally just Kane, who's very unproven, and Ruben Lowry, undrafted rookie. So I would say outside of Chidobe Awuzie, they have some of the worst overall secondary depth in the league. They got to keep these guys upright. And, when Jair is one of those guys, it's going to be a concern. But depth questions, not enough to stop me from already ranking this as the number 1 ranked secondary in the league. It looks spectacular on paper, and I think the floor is really, really that high for this team, but they could run away with the best secondary in the league. Feels like every 5 or 6 years we get one of those Legion of Boom, no-fly zone types of units. Could happen this year, and those teams have won Super Bowls. I'm a pass rush over coverage guy in general, in terms of how I think of the game, how I would build teams. But a big reason for that is it's so hard to get a secondary without a weak link with 5 genuine superstar players that you can count on week in, week out, just taking guys away in coverage. We have seen, though, when you do have a unit that special, and I think the Saxonville defense, too, with Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Boye and some good safeties, they were pretty close to that, too. You can really see the difference it makes if you're consistently taking away first reads, no matter which direction you want to look. It's a real problem. So that's definitely exciting. And that right there, this secondary becoming what we just described, probably this team's easiest path to becoming a consensus, kind of Super Bowl favorite type of team. And then it's just a matter of going out and getting it done in January. But as far as ranking this defense kind of right now, as we do in this series, ranking these teams more at their floor before they hit green lights, before guys show their development, they came out as my 5th overall defense. 6th in pass defense, 3rd in run defense. But the exciting thing is here, you really have a clear path to get better at all 3 levels. Mike Green up front, Trenton Simpson at linebacker, and that secondary. If any number of those things go right, you're going to climb up in these rankings. If all 3 things go right, Jesus, not only are we talking about one of those legendary secondaries, but you might be complemented with an elite front 6. That is how you could get into legitimate Legion of Boom territory, not just from the secondary, but the reason we go to that Legion of Boom as the best defense of the modern NFL era probably is because they didn't just have a great secondary, they had a great front 7. Could be the case here if everything goes right. Now, before we really tie this all together and then look at the schedule and this team's win total expectations, let's take a look at their special teams. So they do actually have some pretty big shakeup in terms of the offseason changes. They say goodbye to franchise legend Justin Tucker, out with one sexual predator, in with another, maybe. But then also with the return guys, Deontay Hardy, Steven Sims out the door. In terms of additions, at kicker, they're going with the rookie in Tyler Loop out of Arizona. And then they do get Keaton Mitchell back, should help out with some kicks. And they drafted LeJontay Webster to really help with the punt returns as well. So a lot of shakeup there. Going to be very much like to be determined in terms of whether they got better or worse. Justin Tucker, off-field issues aside, was not the good old Justin Tucker. Probably started to get in his head a little bit knowing he cost himself his Hall of Fame case with a pretty egregious run of off-the-field behavior. But as far as the special teams is concerned, there's actually a fair share of question marks here, at least as far as Ravens special teams are concerned. I feel like we've kind of always been able to just pencil the Ravens in as a top 5 special teams, and shit, they'll probably figure it out because that's John Harbaugh's background and that's kind of what they do here. But yeah, you got a rookie kicker in Tyler Loop, still a young punter in Jordan Stout that hasn't been amazing. You've got a rookie returner along with Keaton Mitchell hopefully coming back. Like, it's all just kind of up in the air right now, and they didn't grade out for special teams well last year either. PFF analysis had them as the 30th overall special teams. DVOA had them 23rd. So yeah, 24th in terms of special teams. Frankly, as we now shift our focus to the Ravens Venn diagram of strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors, those special teams are probably the closest thing to a weakness that the Ravens do have. I'm still not bold enough to just put it down as a weakness for the Ravens that, like I said, they've earned some benefit of the doubt to say they know what they're doing there. And these, especially a young kicker like Tyler Loop, like probably talented enough that they're going to be fine there. But like I said, probably the closest thing to a weakness is special teams on the Ravens. And that's a testament to just how insane this team is. There's only a handful of teams in this series that got a big fat NA in the weaknesses category. And especially in the case of the Ravens, when you look at their like wild card pivotal factors, things that could go right, things that could go wrong, even some of those other teams like the Eagles, for example, we didn't identify any weaknesses for them, but it was like, oh, maybe the new play caller will be a weakness. Or the Bills, like a lot of question marks on the defense. With Baltimore, there's really not a path roster-wise to have a weakness. Offensive line has some things up in the air. Guard play could be iffy, but overall the O-line should still be pretty good. I mean, the guard play is pretty questionable last year. And then, like, okay, if LB2 is a weakness, they're going to be fine. You got Roquan in your linebacker room. So, special roster in terms of floor, but obviously the ceiling is exciting too. You got your quarterback play, you got King Henry, and you got some superstar talent on defense. I mean, I even list linebacker as a strength, even with LB2 questions, because Roquan is that good. The secondary, I think, is already a strength and could be like an all-time elite strength. And then I think you got to throw the Mike Green factor in there for the wild cards too. The defensive line's certainly not a weakness, but it does not show up as a strength. If Mike Green can just, come in and be a demon right away, it's hard to do that as a rookie pass rusher. It's a lot to ask of him, but if he hits his upside sooner rather than later here, then you're going to see that defensive line be much more of a strength as well, which is very scary to think about. I mean, if that happens, you're starting to get into a territory where it's like your margin for error in January is pretty large. You could be such a dominant team that Mark Andrews can have a big drop, or Lamar can have a brain fart interception, or you can fumble a snap or miss a kick against a key team and still be good enough to overcome it. That's kind of the hope, is anybody like to put yourself in that type of position is ideal and not count on little bounces and luck. But they obviously have some green lights to hit, some things to go right if they're going to get to that status. But their potential is about as good as anybody in the league, Eagles included, even though Baltimore comes in as my number 2 overall team in these power rankings. But for those that did watch my predictions show on Thursday, you did see I picked the Ravens to win the Super Bowl this year. I guess Ravens fans, that's your award for having to wait for this deep dive. But that was kind of a spoiler to this next section, their schedule preview here. And similar to a team like the Eagles, when you are as good of a team as you are, even if the schedule is challenging, you're going to be favorites in most of your games. But I would say the Ravens have a very balanced overall schedule. They draw the AFC East, which outside of that Week 1 game tomorrow against the Bills, you get 3 easier opponents there. with the Jets, Dolphins, and Patriots. But then they get the NFC North. So they got some more of a tough draw out of the NFC side of things. Those things kind of balance themselves out. The AFC North is probably average to above average in terms of divisional difficulty. So it's a pretty balanced schedule. This is much more about the Ravens taking care of their own business. And if they do, certainly a team that I think can go over their win total of 11.5. For those that watched that predictions video, I had them at 12 wins on my season predictions. In terms of Super Bowl odds, I obviously like betting on them to win the Super Bowl because I picked them to win it at 7-1. I think that price is pretty good. But, it is tied for the number one Super Bowl odds with Philadelphia there. And then division odds, they're minus 150. Honestly, if you're parlaying division odds and stuff, that's a pretty good price. I think the Steelers and Bengals are pretty good teams. I had them both making the playoffs, but I do think they're a good cut below where Baltimore is at. I feel pretty confident saying they're going to win this division unless the Bengals defense is way better than we think they will be. But it kind of worked out, not intentionally, but it kind of worked out where we did end up finishing this series off with the team that I picked to win the Super Bowl here in Baltimore. But that is going to do it, you guys. We made it before this team's season started. Technically, the NFL season is officially underway, but just the biggest of thanks to all of you for watching this series. We're talking about 70 plus hours of individual team analysis here. I'm so proud of this series, but it would not be possible without not just you guys watching the series, but the comments, the interaction, the hype on social media, you guys tagging me when's the next deep dive coming out, that. You guys feed me, you feed my inspiration to get this series done. And then also just a massive thanks to all of my supporters on Patreon. I love all you guys, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't love those of you that show your financial support for this channel and everything going on a little bit more. So I hope you guys enjoyed some of the exclusive content this summer, early access to deep dives and my fantasy rankings. Just the absolute biggest of thanks to you guys. And I hope you guys enjoy NFL Sunday, man. Christmas is here for us diehard NFL fans. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll see you soon, though. We got power rankings updates, basically reacting to week 1 here in just a couple days, Tuesday morning. I will see you then. Until then, though, I'm going to go watch some football, go play some golf before the snow comes here in Minnesota. Anyway, enough talking. Let's get out of here. Cheers.